Hello friends and welcome to Maestro Mantra. And today what we are going to discuss about it's the most significant and perhaps the most horrifying topic of this time, and that's a Russian-Ukraine struggle, what is going on. Perhaps we have to first of all peep into the history and take a revival before studying the present, because unless and until we are very clear with the past, we won't be able to get in clear rectified about what this present situation is all going on. If we see the starting of the 20th century, we find it started with all the need and the greed struggle. And since the development of mankind, we find the struggle was going on, and war is an inseparable part of any struggle. And the civilizations has emerged through the war and conflicts also like that. But what we have seen at the starting of 20th century, we have witnessed two great world wars. 1914 to 1918, we have seen the First World War, where the huge massacre and the disastrous things were done. And what we have seen in that part is exactly it was an output of people who were trying about the greed of their powerful nations, going for the industrial things, want to control the world populations, they want to control the iron, steels, and it was all open war. And the Second World War started immediately after 20 years, which was perhaps the reflex of the First World War. It started in the year 1938, and we have seen that has turned more dangerous, more monstrous, and more disastrous. If we see in 1914, by the time, the strong nations list were including England, Germany, France. The spectrum, the nucleus of the powerful nation was in and around Europe. And as per the Indian scenario, we are all aware about the countries which were under the British regime and the British rule, or perhaps the British Raj, what we say. We found them that it was been said very proudly by the Britishers and very propagated by the Britishers that sun never set in British Empire, and their rule and regime was lying in that accord. And when we've seen the First World War, after the First World War, the conditions has happened like the New Englanders, what is right now known as in America, United States of America, emerged. And I always say up in that regard that America was never a powerful nation in this First World War. It is an output of failure of powerful nation. I still remember the quote of Mr. Churchill when he was discussing with Mr. Mahatma Gandhi about the country and its freedom. And Mr. Churchill told Mr. Gandhi that India, when you talk about the India, I don't feel it's as a country as a whole and it has emerged as a country as a whole. He said like that, America is colony, England is country, and India is crowd. And the reply to it given by Mr. Mahatma Gandhi was equally very vibrant and very stunning and very proud. As an Indian flag that, he said that it may be the crowd, but we are still proud of our crowd and its country in its whole sense. Coming back to the topic, when we see like that, the First World War, when it started, it was as a part of struggle to get the control over the resources of the world and who will be the mighty in that regard. During that time, a lot of treaties were signed, and Woodrow Wilson and others were quite initiators up in that regard to make the signed treaties, and we all are aware part of the world history. But America didn't sign that pact and didn't sign the treaties. And we can term it is that like that, we used to term it as in smart moves and static moves, and that has resulted in the conditions going from bad to worse up in that regard. The rise of the Nazi party, that has led to the Second World War and Hitler emerging in all his sense and proved that he can prove his battles, and his invasion towards Poland, completing the countries, conquering the countries. And if we see the study up in that regard, we find that Germany was in more powerful condition. But the great fight was given by Churchill and the Britishers and the allied nations, and the result is all seen. In the Second World War also, we have not seen the active involvement of United States of America till the Pearl Harbor was attacked. If you see, even at that time, Germany was having nuclear weapons and nuclear bombs, but it didn't use it. And just one Pearl Harbor of US was attacked by Japan, and US has replicated it, perhaps given the reflex and attacked with the two disastrous nuclear attack on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the results of which is still seen and still faced by the present generation. What I intend to comment on in this regard is that we have seen the role of America is always in a perplexing stage and more diplomatic than diplomacy required. It has always been a self-centered, it has always been a considering himself as a big brother and trying to control over the things of the world, and that is somewhere all the results up in the conflict that is going in the nations also. Understanding the world politics, understanding the geopolitics, understanding the diplomacy of the world is really different things. But we could see as the world was divided in the Second World War also, like one was in the group with Russia, Germany and others were in the group with US, UK and other allied nations. Anyways, but after that, it was hope like that with the formation of United Nations, there will be the world peace and treaty that is going on. And world will follow on the path of the peace and security. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. To some extent, UN also appeared to be the puppet in the hands of strong nation. In fact, the world was divided into the three worlds: first world nation, second world nation, and third world nation theories, where the developed nations were using developing nations for their own selfish motives, for just like a dumping ground, considering that regard. In especially case when we see in regard in India situation also, in Indian situation, Indian praxis also, we find that America had shown a more sympathetic and more close relations with Pakistan compared to India, and has always given a stepmother treatment to India. Throughout many decades, India was shouting, calling about the attacks and the invasion of Pakistan, and it was talking about the issues of terrorism and other things, which was turned all deaf and the dumb attitude by US and UN Council both. And one day you find suddenly the twin towers were attacked in US of A, and they realized the world is facing terrorism, which they didn't realize till late. Somewhere the same issues we could see lying everywhere up in that regard the world. In the US context, you see a Vietnam War, but more prominent things which I like to talk about just right now will be about the Gulf War. I hope there are people in the 80s and 90s generation might be able to recall the Gulf War when Iraq invaded the Kuwait, and it was all the struggle after the iron. It was all about the oil in the pipeline, and the US and others wanted to control the pipe and the oil centered over there. And it was a great war. It was moved more than 2 months, where the great conflict was going on. Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, and all of the Gulf countries were in the great maze, and there was a great war situations, and it was horrifying situations, which finally ended by the great turmoil of Iraq. And you could see the way Saddam Hussein was assassinated, and perhaps I will not use the word assassinated, with the way he was caught. There was an open hanging, and on the name of justice it was given to him. Anyways, that goes in the part of aligned, but US has made a lot of things when they were trying to caught Saddam Hussein also, and the court of justice tried to prove that what Saddam is guilty, and he was hanged publicly, trying to demonstrate perhaps the might of US of A. Whether it was right or wrong, that's a matter of all individual and institutional morality and integrity. We not need to discuss up in that way. But right now, this conflict is also moving in the same direction. The conflict is between USA and USSR, which was there earlier, and after the USSR turned into fragments, it was divided. It has turned that US felt that it could get the control over the world more easily. And as a part of an Indian scenario and political situations like that, in the 1971 war, 62-65 war, especially in the 1971 war against Pakistan, there was a great support from the Russian military that we could fight with the Pakistan when the American military was supporting the Pakistan. So India has always been a very smooth, very healthy and very warm relations with USSR. And when it was torn and broke into pieces also, and perhaps it was divided into various countries and small countries in that regard, but in spite of that, we were in a great harmony with that relations, not only on terms of military pattern, but also the cultural exchange, the educational things were all proceeding in that regard. And especially, this has helped in these two scenario situations to keep a hawk eye and check on US of A. So especially when this world is crying that why India is making a neutral remark on the UN and not supporting Ukraine openly, you have to understand it's a political conditioning and political situation that we have to keep it in mind. It is a part of an integral issues between the Russia and Ukraine, and the world was still dumb and silent when the 2014 when Russia has first attacked the part over there in the Ukraine and has captured and annexed that. That time neither NATO nor UN has made any of the thing. This is something similar I'd like to tell you, inform about when China attacked Tibet and got it annexed, and still that issue is prevalent. What world could give is a peace, World Peace Prize and Nobel Peace Prize to Dalai Lama, but they could not give him his piece of land. The righteous land where he believes to, the righteous man where Tibetan believe to. So when it comes to the personal things, people are become very prejudiced about others, but when it comes to on their personal things and conflict, they feel that the world should take over the things very seriously. Of course, Ukraine is in great crisis, and the issue of Ukraine is a matter of a great concern. But at the same time, understanding the geopolitical situations, India and the Indian diplomacy needs to be taken care of everything from the future aspects. Coming to Ukraine point up in that regard, I think in the 2014, the world community was quite aware when Russia has moved towards the same country, the part of the region in Ukraine and part in acts in that regard. Russian ambitions was quite well known when Mr. Vladimir Putin has made few changes, perhaps reamendments in the constitutions where he could elect himself more than 2 times. It was very clear and very sure that his ambitions, not only as an individual but also as an institutions, are going high, and it's going to be real serious issues for the nearby countries. If you see, the conflict of Ukraine and Russia is just like the matter of an elder brother and younger brother fighting over property disputes, like that, in a simple way. If you see the Russian movies, you could see always Russian actors or perhaps the Russian people are acting as an elder brothers. And in the Russian movies, you will find someone who is coming from the Ukraine is stored as a secondary or tertiary, and there is a word they use as hahulu or holulu. Perhaps that's the word that they mean and stands for a person who is not very finished, very not polished, very raw, or like a countryman. Or perhaps they feel a secondary treatment and they feel that they are not very good finished. They consider themselves a little bit inferior to the Russians. Perhaps the superiority complex you could see that reflect in their movies and culture, which reflects the culture and the psyche of that region too. To Russians, the generation which were in the past, especially in India and the subcontinent and the Asian countries, we are aware that how during the time of Mr. Mikhail Gorbachev, Mr. Boris Yeltsin, and the earliers also, how the Soviet states have learned the socialism and communism has been adopted over here. When we have gone through the study of the Lenin, the Karl Marx, and various isms have emerged up in that line. But the kind of a warmth relations we were having at the time of Mr. Mikhail Gorbachev, the president of Russia at that time, and which was above the systems of the czars. The Russian czars, as you know, they were some of the more rich and lavish, and he turned out to be the more socialistic relations. And at that time in 80s and 90s, in most of the educated families, the magazines used to come like Sputnik. Right now, to this generation, Sputnik might be a vaccine for against the COVID, but to the generations of 1890s, Sputnik was the first launch satellite by the Russia, and there was a magazine coming to Indian houses in along with the Reader's Digest and Sputnik. I hope the people can recall, like Soviet Russia, Soviet Nari, Soviet Sun, and Russia, and it is to all decorate the drawing room and the study room of the people, and that was a kind of a bond that has been happening like that. Mr. Nehru's policy also, if you could see the policy of Mr. Nehru was also to be in well harmony with Russia and to support and to carry everyone in the same accord. And he was always keeping, because at that time when India has come out of the British regime, we always wanted to be in the search of good friends and good reliable friends, and that's what we have done. If you move to the Indian Air Force systems, and especially HAL or Hindustan Aeronautics Limited and other places, you could find the lot of development work carried in the work of MiG, Sukhois and other aircrafts, and we are a lot in MOUs with Russia. So though we are in a good and harmonious relation with Russia, but that doesn't justify a Russian attack on Ukraine. Because perhaps like in Mahabharata, the Indians or India's role has become like Karna, who was with Duryodhan as a part of his friendship, his abided by his duty, by his karma, and his faithfulness towards Duryodhan, but he was knowing that what is going on, it's wrong. But in that condition, he cannot leave him also, because he has promised up in that way. What India could do is that India could make a sympathetic remark and sympathetic conversation to both Ukraine and Russia and try to work as a neutral catalyst and get them on the common bridge and ground. Understanding the Ukraine things and their what has been there, it's really very sad what the Ukraine is going through, and it has been turned into debris and attacked by Russia. And it's more than a week this conflict is going on, but that's more than a Ukraine, it's a worry for Russia. In the case and in the sense, because the world was considering Russia as a mighty power in the South Asian countries and the close European matter. And next to the USA, the country which could give stand and give war, and it was in close association with India. If this picture is clear, a small country like Ukraine could stand against Russia and give a more than a weak fight, it is really going to be a difficult situation for Russia if all other nations could make their coalitions, and the prejudices or perhaps the perception about Russia that it is the mighty country and it can really turn the things and tear off other countries. So its might will be a matter of great fear if a small countries like Ukraine could stand and fight against more than 70 days. And it's not a good sign for India also, because the next time when we'll be looking and talking for the support of Russia, so other countries will just look with a pinch of salt. So it would have been a great matter of thing if Russia could have done these things with the negotiation, maintaining its a big brother position, resolving the conflict up in that regard. Very hats off to Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, who had been really seriously and sincerely working and making a very staunch fight, and like a real fighter he has been putting it up. And Putin, who was an international star, who was in the KGB head, who was with all black belt in the Taekwondo, Karate, and on the other side we were having Vladimir Zelensky, who was a comedian and who was a great dancer and artist, and we could see that both comes from the different background and different fields, but the table has turned, and Mr. Zelensky has been admired as a more mighty and powerful man, where perhaps Mr. Putin has been portrayed as a more frustrated and more brutal and more venomous and more vindictive person. Mr. Putin was having all the capacity to emerge as a world leader, and still he is having that. And unfortunately, the two countries in the UN, in the Security Council, which has been the neutral, is India and China. In the post-COVID scenario and during the COVID scenario also, the China has always been the black sheep in the world's things. So the world cannot dare to, we can say, have any conflict with India and try to force. The US has put many restrictions on Indian trade, and they are trying to use the pressure politics to turn India on its side. But at the same time, the world political leaders need to understand this India conditions, Indian situations, and to understand this political scenario and situation, we need to be quite liberated and things in a broader praxis. Of course, the Ukraine is in a great conflict. The Ukraine situation is really very pathetic. But the countries which are just making our cold discussions need to be more proactive. The countries which have is having an hypocritic attitudes towards the East and West. All these powerful nations, all these United Nations, NATO, we have G20, G8, G7, and blah blah blah. The hell of the summit. They are supposed to discuss and resolve rather than to fight for the right in that regard. I really don't understand why they failed to resolve the issues on the first step, second step, whether they could not see making, and we are not merely knocking at the door of the third world war, but we are perhaps banging the door. Perhaps we are just trying to open and blow the door for the third world war. In this situation, especially in the post-pandemic situations, or perhaps we are trying to control corona and almost we are about to get the rid of it, we cannot afford, the humanity cannot afford to have a new conflict in the phase of the third world war. My dear friends, let's pray for Ukraine, and let's pray for Russia also, that they will get the sanity to resolve the issues in a very peaceful manner with the talk and walk. Today I came to know that the second round of discussions will be going on, and definitely with the good diplomacy, with the good practices, the things will be working and the balls will keep rolling, because even Russia can't afford to keep the things prolonged and lose his image and perhaps the perception about his world as a mighty military power. But the disaster which has been done in Ukraine is really inhuman. It cannot be supported. It cannot be solicited. So we need to be very particular and practical about situations. We need to teach from to the Russia and to all the nations who are trying to use their might in wrong manner, that with great power comes the great responsibility. You cannot take things for granted. If you are taking things for granted, you'll be left with no grants. It's a time that we have to come back to the normalcy. It's a time we have to learn from the Indian values, the importance of love and faith. We have to go for the principle of the Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that is of universal brotherhood and peace. And definitely, there is no issue that cannot be resolved with a positive and open-minded discussion. Perhaps there need to be no gap between the intention and implementation. With any pride, prejudices, and hypocrisy, we cannot reach anywhere. In these things, or what really worries and a matter of a great disgrace is that unless and until it affects you personally, when you're someone close and Keith Keens are there directly involved, you can't feel the pain what is going on. The war is always been a disastrous, and the last person who wants the war to happen is a soldier. No soldier wants that a war to commence, because only a soldier can understand the importance of peace. On one side, a lot many students have come back to India. A lot many students are coming and getting to struggle to come to India, and we pray for them also that they will be back soon safe in that regard. But at the same time, the Indian government also need to understand why there is a situation that a lot many students are migrating to the Western countries for the educations. Can't we provide them quality education? Can't we provide them good, affordable educations? That's a topic of discussion also, especially Ukraine, Russia, and other countries are known for their good, affordable medical education, which the students are quite deprived of in India, and then they go forward for. In this present situation, why the struggle has been coming up, we appears to be a failure, and there's a lot many rumors about the failure of intelligence, about the war scenes and situation. But I feel our Indian embassy, Indian government has tried their level best, and they are trying, because when nothing goes wrong, something goes wrong, everything goes wrong. You cannot predict this political situations, political scenario, how fastly and how topsy-turvy it can be. But in spite of all that, I have taken a great care. And it's always been our human tendency and nature to be sympathetic towards the person who is more suffering, to give, who is a victim perhaps. But at the same time, we have to understand the other side of the coin also. What Ukraine is going through is a matter of a great disgrace, and we should really condemn the act and action of Russia. But at the same time, we should be in a friendly things, and we shall try to counsel the Russia rather than having a conflict with Russia and other countries too. And the world need to understand and realize the importance of the peace. And hats off to Mr. Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, the way he's been standing with the cause, with his going, and the support, kind of the support he's getting through. And definitely in coming days, we are very damn sure that in a great collaboration, Ukraine will emerge as a great country and a prosperous country again. And this conflict will turn into the peaceful resolutions. And with all this prayer, I conclude, and I feel that in coming days, the world will be the more better place to live without having such chaotic condition and such chaotic disorder. Bye from now. Thank you. Vande Mataram.